Okay, welcome to math. This lesson is just me today. Your goal today is to learn to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. That's really the only change from yesterday. Along with today's date and page number, write it down and then move on. All right, so here's your warm-up. You got 4 problems. You can see these all do have like denominators, so it shouldn't take you too long. Do make sure, though, that they are in simplest form. Come back when you have completed these. Here are the answers you should have gotten. For number 1 and 2, they're already in simplest form when you add them together. For number 3, 9/9, I had to change to 1 whole. And for 4, I had 15/20, and I changed that to 3/4 by dividing both by 5. Hopefully you got all 4 correct. Give yourself a pat on the back if you did. And let's move on to today's new stuff. So here's a problem that kind of looks like the thing that we would need to use today's skill for. Let's say that we were talking about the oceans of Earth. So the Pacific Ocean covers 1/3 of the Earth. The Atlantic Ocean covers 1/5. If we had to find the fraction of the Earth's surface that is covered by both of these, we know that we would add the two together. But what are we going to do to make sure that the thirds and the fifths are the same number? That's what we're going to work on today. So we have a definition here, and it's the second sentence that you need to write down in your notebook. You can use any common denominator or least common denominator when adding and subtracting, unlike fractions. But it'll make it a lot easier when you have a least common denominator. That is the number that can be multiplied. You also know least common denominator as least common multiple. That's what you're going to be working on today to make sure you know how to do strongly to be able to find like denominators to divide or add or subtract fractions. So write this down before moving on. So let's start with some application problems in example 1. Mark here made a pizza with pepperoni covering 1/4 of the pizza and onions covering another 1/3. So what fraction of the pizza is covered by pepperoni and onions? So really what we're looking for here is we're going to add 1/4 and 1/3. So to be able to find this, the first thing we have to do is find a common denominator. So to find the common denominator, we're looking for the least common denominator or least common multiple. So to find them, for 4 and 3, we just have to list out our multiples of 4. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, first 5. 3, 6, 9, 12. Oh, hold on. Here we go. They both have a 12, so that becomes your least common denominator. So if we rewrite them, and I usually like to write mine top to bottom, just so it's easier to look at, we know that we can make both of them 12ths, but how do you change the numerator? Well, remember what you do to the bottom, 4 times 3 gives us 12 here. You have to do to the top. 1 times 3 gives us 3. That's how I got 3/12. For the next number, 3 times 4 gives you 12. What you do to the bottom, you do to the top. 1 times 4 gives you 4. So now that you have common denominators, you know the answer is just going to be 12 for the denominator, and now just add 3 and 4 and you get 7. Can we simplify 7/12? It already is. Nothing that 7 and 12 have in common as a factor. They are done. So that's how you work with these. Now, because it's a word problem, I would also say 7/12 of the pizza is covered by pepperoni and onions. Copy this down before moving on. Yeah. All right, so let's jump into some practice right away. I have 5 problems here I want you to try. All of them are adding or subtracting. The biggest thing is make sure you have a common denominator before you move on. Good luck on these, and then come back when you're done. We'll see how you did. Here are the answers you should have received by doing the work. So the word problem 1, we knew that the wood and the trailer was 2/3 ton. When you look at just the weight of the trailer, it was 1/4, so we had to subtract away. Common denominator, least common denominator I found was 12. So then I just changed the numerators equally. And then for number 2 and 3, I hope you recognize that one of those fractions in both of them had the least common denominator already. That would be 1/9 for number 2 and 7/10 for number 3. when you have those, it makes the math a lot easier. You don't have to change anything with that first fraction. That's why it's so much better to do least common denominator than multiplying both numbers together to get a common denominator. For 4, the least common denominator, least common multiple of 3 and 5 was 15, so I planned accordingly. And for 5, 2 and 7, 14. So if you got all those right, give me a high five, and then you can get back to work on practice, or example in practice 2. So we did some subtraction here, but I want us to talk about, there's a couple different methods here on how you can subtract unlike fractions. And what I want to show you here is multiplying denominators as our first method. So multiplying denominators is exactly what we did with adding fractions, except we're not finding the least common multiple. We're just multiplying the two denominators together. So if you do that, you can find a common denominator just as easily. So multiply 10 times 8, you get 80. Now what you have to do is figure out what did you do to 10 to get 80. That would be 10 times 8. What you do to the bottom, you do to the top. 7 times 8 is 56. How do you go from 8 to 80? You multiply by 10. So what you do to the bottom, you do to the top, and that's how we got 3 times 10 being 30. So from here then you subtract 56 from 30, you get 26, and 80 stays the same. Now you know that 26 and 80 are both even numbers, so we can simplify simply by dividing both numbers by 2. Half of 26 is 13, and we know we're done because 13 is a prime number, and half of 80 is 40. So that's how you can use multiplying of the denominators to make it a little quicker, easier for you if you struggle to find the least common multiple or least common denominator. Put this down in your notes before moving on. Another method you could use is mental math. Now, some of you are really good with your math facts. You're probably one of them. Some people aren't. If you're quick with your math facts and you looked at this problem of 5/16 plus 1/8, you know that 8 goes into 16, so you can quickly rewrite the denominators 16 and 16. Your quick math also tells you what you did at the bottom, you did at the top. So that's how you get 5/16 plus 2/16 to equal 7/16. This one works better with mental math because multiplying 16 and 8 would take way too long. But if you can find the least common multiple or least common denominator, that usually makes it go a little quicker. All right, here are some problems I want you to try. You see a whole lot of problems here. I'm going to simplify it for you. I want you to do 7, and then I want you to do 8 and 12, 10, and 14. The others will leave for extra practice. Come back when you've completed those 5 problems. All right, so for the first problem, finding out how much more cheese does Cedric need to grate, I knew that we were subtracting since it said how much more. So 2/3 minus 1/2, I had to find a common denominator. I found 6 as the least common denominator, least common multiple. And then I changed my numerators. And I got 4/6 minus 3/6, so 1/6 cup. I forgot to write cup, sorry. 1/6 cup is what's left to be graded for this problem. For 8, I noticed that the least common multiple of 2 and 4 is 4, so I didn't have to change 3/4 at all. I only had to change 1/2. 2 times 2 got us 4, so what you do to the top, you do to the bottom. So 2 times 1 gave me 2. When I subtracted, I got 1/4. For 10, I noticed I had to change both 4 and 6, but luckily, the least common multiple of those two is a small number of 12. So 6 times 2 gave us 12. So what we did at the bottom, we did the top, and that's how I got 5 times 2 being 10. And 4 times 3 gave us 12. What we did at the bottom, I also did the top. 3 times 3 is 9. That's how I got 10 minus 9 to be 1/12. For 12, I noticed that 80 would work. I just multiplied the two together. And I got 66/80ths, and I knew they were both even, so I divided them by 2 to get them in the simplest form. That's 33/40ths. And then for 14, I noticed 9 was already the least common multiple, least common denominator, so I only had to change 2/3. 3 times 3 gave me 9, so what you do to the bottom, you do to the top. 2 times 3 is 6. So that's how I got 2/9. Hopefully you got those right as well. Here is your box of thought. Take your time, answer these correctly. And here is your quiz. All 5 questions are listed here. Make sure all 5 are in simplest form. And for number 5, label it with at least cup next to it so that you're completing the word problem. And that's it. We'll see you next time. Thanks for putting in your best effort and trying to improve. We'll see you.